Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Cam Snow. We're going to talk about copywriting.
Yeah.
Going to be a good conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right. So I know you are a lot more than just a copywriter, and we'll get into all of that. But I want to just take a moment and somewhat introduce you so that our audience knows who they're going to be listening to for the next 20 to 30 minutes. So can you tell us a little bit about your business?
Yeah. A little bit about my business. So what I do is I help entrepreneurs tell their stories in a way that resonates deeply with their audience so that they can produce leads for a lifetime. And I have a methodology called the story economy. It's a 7-story framework that I take somebody's deep heart, soul story and put it into a framework that can be shared and create connections with the people that are really meant for you to serve.
And I will say you are very intuitive and very good at pulling out people's shit. So, so there's a little plug for you.
Thank you.
So now, as much as you call me out for being maybe a little bit guarded with putting my story out there, the listeners have heard a fair amount of my story. And that is really where the gold is for a lot of business owners. And now when we're talking about writing copy, if someone is somewhat indoctrinated into online marketing, that's going to mean something different than it would to somebody who maybe just has a website for their business.
Totally. Yeah.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more in depth about what this actually means when we're talking about creating copy. Yeah, that does include your website copy, but it is quite a bit more than that. So can you elaborate for us?
Totally. Yeah. Like the journey of writing copy and being a copywriter, every entrepreneur is a copywriter, whether or not you know it. And there is always going to be a space in your business where you have to write something, whether it's your website or whether it's a pitch deck or it's a speech or whatever. There's always a space for that. Copywriting is different from content in that copy is specifically about persuasion. Content is about inspiration, education, motivation, things like that. But when we use the word copywriting, we're specifically talking about persuasion. There's a lot of elements to that. But when we look at the broad spectrum of how this fits into your business, copywriting are the words that we use to sell, and they live in every part of the customer journey. The customer journey starts with someone not even knowing that they have a need for what you do, not even knowing that they have a problem, and then moving into an awareness of what that problem is, into an awareness of what the solution is, and an awareness of your solution. And we use copy to facilitate that journey. And we're not always selling the product. Oftentimes in those beginning phases, we're simply selling ideas. And we're simply selling beliefs that need to shift so that when we get to a place where we are writing sales copy specifically about booking the call or buying the product, those words have a much better chance of success because we've done all the pre-work of shifting beliefs and changing mindsets and educating about what exactly is that we're doing and how we can help them. So copy is all about persuasion, and it extends from the very first touch point of like a Facebook ad or an organic post on Instagram, all the way up to your sales page, your webinar, your book a call page, stuff like that.
Now, you've had a lot of success doing this type of work throughout your career. So it's not like you just made this stuff up.
Right.
One of the things that I'd love to dive into a little bit since we have you and we have your expertise here, because there are a lot of people who are doing all sorts of stuff on social media as sort of a way of warming up new leads, a way of staying top of mind with prospective leads or even existing clients or customers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's there's a lot of different ways that people are doing that. Now, when we're talking about your story and being more strategic about your approach to this, what are you finding typically works the best?
It's going to depend on what kind of business you're running. It's going to depend on specifically what kind of audience you're serving. So there are a number of really popular, social media marketing strategies out there, including like building a Facebook group and filling up leads and nurturing with content in that way. So, since we're both in the coaching consulting niche, there's a thing that happens in our industry in this niche that you could call like the flavor of the year, the flavor of the month. Like there's these fads that come and go. And there are some strategies that are eternal, no matter what happens. And what I have found works best as kind of a principle, just in general, is just what you could kind of at a broad level say is just event marketing. And what I mean by that is, especially when you're selling a kind of service that is very personal, where it's like, I'm going to be your coach, like what you do, like I'm going to be your mindset coach. There's a lot of trust, there's a lot of intimacy involved in that process. One of the best ways to monetize is to have some kind of event-based model. Not necessarily talking about in-person, although that's super cool. And I do run in-person events, but just whether you look at like the webinar model that has continued to work in certain areas, or the workshop model, or the 5-day challenge model, all of them involve some kind of live in-person interaction that has a lot of energy around it. There's something about like, hey, we're doing this thing on, next Friday or whatever, that has a certain energy, excitement. It kind of checks all of the persuasion boxes when it comes to copywriting. And typically I find that when I'm sitting down with someone to do a new marketing strategy kind of, mapping session, there's always some kind of event model. And what that event looks like is going to depend on the audience. Some people do really well with running a 5-day challenge. And some people do really well with just doing like a 2 or 3 hour paid workshop. So those are the kinds of things that I don't think change too much. And just how people interact with those things and their level of interest will change based on how you position that thing. Because essentially what's kind of popular now and has been popular for maybe the last year, there are these strategies that have always been around that just kind of come to the forefront of the consciousness of the market, I should say. And like paid workshops are a big thing right now, like tiny products. And those have always been around, but they're kind of more popular right now. And for some people, it's just a webinar. It's a webinar format, but they put a price tag on it. And it changes how it's perceived. And that's really actually the whole psychology behind creating a new offer, is that you're not necessarily changing the product, granted, if the product works, but you're changing how it's presented and how people interact with it so that it hits a different part of their psychology.
So you mentioned webinars, which I think a lot of people would associate as video based, not necessarily copy, but really copy goes into every stage of that process.
Yeah, totally.
So from the ad that you're running or the post that you're posting to the landing page, the opt-in page, the sales page, if you're bringing somebody into a low priced option, all the way into the script if you're doing like a webinar that is more strategically laid out. So do you help your clients with all of those things?
Yeah. And that's actually where the story comes in, right? Because I kind of like talk about it with you're just lifting. Like I've got this enormous water bottle that I always have around. So I'm doing a nutrition challenge. It's 100 ounces, 100 ounces a day. So your strategy, the webinar, the post, the email, whatever it is like the container of the water bottle. And you can buy a super sexy, like Under Armour thermo insulated with a handle and a whistle. I was looking at this on Amazon the other day. Like this, it looks like it's wearing like bulletproof armor. It's like this ridiculously expensive looking water bottle. Or you can have like the Deer Park giant ugly water bottle that doesn't really seem very attractive. That's like the strategy. And what actually matters is no matter how cool my water bottle is, the only thing that actually matters is how good the water is. If I put crappy water in there, then the container doesn't actually matter. So this is where a lot of people get tripped up. And I have a model that is kind of in the formation, so it doesn't really have a good name. So I call it the SMS model right now, and it's terrible, but we're working on it. But SMS stands for story message system or story message strategy. And what a lot of people do is they focus on strategy first when they want to fix their marketing problem. Oh, I need the webinar, I need the post, I need the emails, I need these things. But before that, you need a good message. And a good message is the one that speaks to that ideal client. It talks to their pain, it talks to their problem, it talks to their aspiration, and that can make your strategy work. But where things get dicey is if your message is disconnected from your story, then you can have a successful business and end up hating it and build something where you actually don't belong. And so that's why I focus first on story, which is to make sure that that message that comes through is your message, not just a message, if that makes sense. It's not just something that works. It's something that works for you in the totality of your life and like the calling that God put on your life. So that piece of it, the best message that you can have is the one that comes from your personal life experience, so that when you talk about pain points, you talk about aspirations, it's coming from somewhere real, not just something that you are strategically copywriting in order to get the sale. Because you could go too far into the direction of the strategy and end up in what I call the dark arts of copy, which is really just the manipulation and the scarcity. And I was reading some of it the other day from someone who was like, I can make you a lot of money. And I was reading his copy and I just felt like I needed to take a shower after reading it. So that's kind of like the way I approach it. And having the guts of the thing be like pure and in integrity is the most important part of it.
There's a lot of really good takeaways that you just weaved into that answer. So a couple things that I just want to highlight because I think they're too good and I don't want people to miss the gold.
Okay.
So you shared the importance of having a story that essentially aligns with your ideal client, correct?
Correct.
So rather than just putting out copy that converts anyone with a pulse who may be attracted
Right.
to what you're offering and ending up with clients or customers who are not the right fit for your business.
Totally.
This allows you to create relationships with the types of clients and customers that you love doing business with, the right people.
100%. Yes.
Now, you also said something really interesting there about the would you refer to that as the dark arts of copy?
The dark arts of copy, yeah.
And let's be honest, we've all been there, we've all seen it, we've all felt it. And I think for some people, that is the reason that they're so resistant to
100%.
creating sales
100%.
copy. Just like in sales, when you've been sold by the sleazy sales person, you start to form this internal resistance. You don't want to be that person. And so now it's sort of the all or nothing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that way. Therefore, I shall not do this thing that I absolutely need to do to grow my business.
Right. Yes. Let people pay me.
So let's go there for a moment, because
Yeah.
I think it's important to start to take down those walls and disassociate from some of that really dysfunctional thinking around sales copy. Because if done right, you are coming from a place of service.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, what comes up when you say that is, when I first started in this world of marketing persuasion. So I actually came up in politics. I spent 6 years in politics doing kind of everything in that world. So if you want a crash course in the dark arts of copy, you go and you work in politics. So that's really what I was surrounded by, even though the people that I worked with, by and large, were like pretty good people. And we would still have conversations about, okay, can we say this? Okay, like, it's technically true. So yes, we can say this, and like the FPPC is not going to come after us, which is the Fair Political Practices Commission. We can say this thing, and like, it's a good enough hit, but it's not going to get us into legal trouble, so we can say it. And that was just kind of the culture of politics, is like, what can we do to kind of take out the other side and still cling to a morsel of our conscience. It took me a solid 2 or 3 years of detox to kind of like rewire after that experience. But when I got into copywriting for the guy that I wrote for, Scott Old, for 3 years, I thought that the words were the only thing that mattered. And so I was obsessed with like the right words. And as a copywriter, I will tell you, the words really do matter. However, who you are being when you create those words, who you are being in the context of your brand, is far, far more important. And so I looked at the dark arts, the dark side of copy, and I was like, well, this is what's necessary. Like, you have to do this because the only thing that matters is words. And that feeds deep into my story of, I know we'll talk about mindset, I know, at some point, my story of worthiness and feeling like I was voiceless. In order to make a contribution and to have a place in this company, I really felt like I had to do whatever I needed to. And definitely played with the dark arts, for sure. And it worked. Like, it definitely works. And what I learned is that, like, just because you put something like ethically do this thing, or like ethically build a cult, just because you put the word ethically in it doesn't mean it's ethical. Like, you could do that for anything. And that whole just world, there is a titan in the marketing industry called Agora, if you've ever heard of Agora, specifically Agora Financial. And I have no problem going on record taking shots at Agora, because they are kind of the revered school of copy. Like, if you want to learn persuasion and copywriting, Agora has mastered the craft and mastered the process of teaching the craft, because they hire people and they put them through their process and they spit out good copywriters. The problem is that they sell snake oil, and they are just not, like, their marketing is just, it is the castle of the bastion where the dark arts live. And that influence, that side of copy, that side of persuasion and marketing and influence, is seductive because it works, but it cannot work sustainably, and it cannot work when you are trying to build a brand and trying to make your mark in a world in a different kind of way, where you're standing for like authentic enrollment, and you look at the sales process as a place for people to make a powerful decision to break through a pattern that's been in their life forever. And you can look at marketing the same way, But there's all this other stuff of like, oh, you just have to do this, put the countdown timer on your webinar, on your evergreen webinar, pretend it's live, even though like everybody knows it's not a live webinar. Or pretend to, here we go, pretend that you're actually the person in Messenger, even though it's your VA in Messenger, and you literally have voice clips of you saying like, hey, it's actually me when people ask if it's your VA. Stuff like that, where it works. It gets the conversion, it gets the sale, and you lose a little bit of your conscience. You lose a little bit of yourself in the process every time. Not to say that you can't reconcile that fairly easily, but it has a cost. And if we read any science fiction or fantasy novel, you always know that dark magic has a cost. So don't do
it. Well, I maybe naively, maybe wishful thinkingly hope that everyone listening is coming from a place of consciousness. And, you know, we all have our work to do, no doubt, and we all are probably a little rough around the edges in some areas that we could do some smoothing out. But I do believe that most people who are going to be vibrationally aligned with listening to this podcast do want to be in integrity and have that sense of, being congruent with all of their marketing. And I think that there's a lot of people who are really struggling right now because they're following some of those models that don't feel congruent and don't feel like they're fully and completely in integrity. And
Totally.
that comes through in your marketing. It comes through, people can pick that up, they can sense it, they can feel it. Not to mention, when we're out of alignment with ourselves, it has a spillover effect onto other areas of our life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, congruency in marketing is like, it's this hidden pain that I think a lot, like I said, I think a lot of entrepreneurs experience this. I think it's probably in the top 5, like most painful problems that you can experience as an entrepreneur. And one that we often pass over in favor of talking about making more money, or we pass over in favor of talking about more leads, more sales, more growth. And there comes a point where you realize that if you want those things, actually the best path is through congruency. And sometimes it can be difficult to acknowledge that pain because it's such a deep personal thing. But, for me, what it looks like, has looked like, continues to look like as an ongoing process is voicelessness. Because when there's an incongruency in my marketing, the words that I'm speaking, I could stand on a stage like this, on podcast or whatever, and speak for days and feel like I didn't say anything at all. Because there was that missing piece of like, well, who am I? What am I really doing here? What am I really speaking? And where is it really coming from? And without understanding my story and how I got to where I am and all the pieces that aligned to build me, not just as the professional, but as the person, it was very difficult and produced a lot of chaos in my life, both professionally and personally, for a long time.
So this is sort of a natural segue into that question about the mindset obstacles. And we all have plenty. In fact, that's really at the heart of this podcast, is helping business owners. It needs to be known that you're not alone. Mm-hmm. Everyone is going through their stuff. We're all going through stuff. We all continue to grow and evolve. We all are bumping up against different things at different points. And demystifying this whole success story
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm
Well, yeah.
sure you know as well as I do plenty of people who are very well off financially, very successful in their
Mhm.
businesses, and they've got these sort of dark hidden secrets. And it's not
Mhm.
because they're bad people, it's because they're ashamed
Mhm.
to get the help they need to work through them.
Mhm.
There's like this weird idea that people have that somehow everyone else has it all together and I don't.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. 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 The question um, of like what mindset obstacle I had to overcome. It's interesting because like the answer when you asked me that before the interview, before we hit record, I think I had a different answer than what's coming up now. And I've always told myself that I'm pretty good at vulnerability. And I think for me, the biggest obstacle that I've had to overcome is leaning through what others call vulnerability to find mine. Because I'm really good at manufactured vulnerability. I'm really good at revealing enough for people to be like, oh yeah, wow, he really gets me. And at one point, my threshold was sharing about my porn addiction. Talking about the successful person with the dark secrets, like that was me. But what actually came up in the context of that question was actually the deeper thing beyond that, because what I was actually ashamed of was not actually the porn addiction. It was actually admitting to myself that I hurt that much that I turned to that thing. And kind of looking at myself and thinking like you're weak for holding on to something that it's been 15 years, or holding on to things I didn't even know what I was holding on to. I just knew that I was in so much pain all the time. And there was a period of about a year when I first started my business in 2019, where I remember waking up every day with the feeling in my body that only time I'd ever felt it was the day after my best friend had passed away when I was 14. It was waking up with that feeling of a shocking sense of grief and loss. And so naturally, the porn addiction exploded that year. And the mindset, for me, I look at mindset as this interconnected thing. It's a state of being, not just a way of thinking. Your way of thinking is a critical part of the process. But for me, I did a lot of mindset stuff, and I've even got my mindset frames right on my computer in front of me, like right here. I'm free to create without judgment is one of them when I'm writing copy, and I need those things. But the deeper mindset for me was understanding and allowing myself to really actually let people in on a level that actually scared me, that actually brought with it a sense of risk. And it has never been the things that I thought it was. Um, but in letting myself let go of this perception of I need to be something other than what I am. I need to be someone other than who I am, because who I am is not good enough. And I need to repeat and tell myself and tell everyone else about the $10 million in revenue I've generated, and about the six-figure launches that I've helped create, and all of this stuff. And coming to realize that so much of that copy that I wrote was to me. And letting myself be with that and recognize that, you asked the question of like, what's the mindset obstacle you had to overcome in the process? Like that's one that's it's every day, every single day. And there are iterations of that thing that I have overcome like permanently. Am I good enough to post in this Facebook group? Yes. Like that was a fear at one point of putting myself out there in that specific way. Am I good enough to hold a sales call and hold the container? Am I good enough to do this thing, to do that thing? And there are iterations of that belief, that mindset that I can look back and be like, yeah, I've overcome that. And then there are new iterations that come out of nowhere and knock me off my feet. And I feel like I just got hit by a train. And I'm like, is this ever going to end? And it feels like the answer is like, yes and no. Like there will always be something for me to work through. So the mindset stuff is the only game in a lot of ways. I've been in containers where it was just about strategy, and I've been in containers that it was just about mindset. And the strategy was painful to implement without the mindset. And the mindset made me feel really good, but didn't necessarily produce results by itself when I didn't have somewhere to go with it. So finding that balance is really key now. Yeah, that's 100% the biggest mindset that I face on a daily basis. And it's the medicine that I need, which is why I do the work that I do of helping people tell their story and get access to the real one, because it's the thing that I need the most.
Thank you for sharing that. There are a lot of people that really, really resonate with what you're saying, because this is the journey that we're all going through in our own unique way. And I'll tell you, when I'm working with my clients, some of the things that you're saying here are exactly the things that are coming out of my clients' mouths too, because that is exactly what it feels like. You're doing the inner work and you are breaking through a little bit of this here and a little bit of it there, and you're up leveling and you're building yourself up and you are getting more clear on who you are. And as you continue on your path, you're bumping up against another trigger that brings up another layer of that. And I literally, I've said it before on this podcast, I've literally heard so many times, certain clients will say it a lot more than others, is this ever going to end? I thought I worked through this before. Like, well, you did. And that progress that you made is real. That shift did matter. And you see the growth. But when it gets triggered again, or some other, ideation of it, or whatever causes that, it's like you feel all of those intense emotions and it causes you to second guess yourself, and you start to trip up over the old stories and the old patterns of, self-talk that is not, not so great, we'll say. 100%. It is the journey.
Yeah. And in those moments, it can feel like, man, I've made no progress at all. But it's actually all the work that you did up until that point is what made that trigger even available and made that area of work even available to you. And it's only because of that foundation that you laid. And it's like, man, why am I still dealing with this? Like, well, technically you're not dealing with this in the same way. It's a totally new thing. It's just, I like to say it's like new level, new devil. It's the same as the old devil. And understanding that process. And for me, what I've discovered is that the antidote is grace. Having grace for yourself, receiving grace is just, it's the only thing you can do. Like literally the only thing that you can do is just to have grace for the process.
Absolutely. We could probably go off on a whole tangent about that alone. So 100%. Cam, you know your stuff and you're damn good at what you do. And there are people listening who I think really could benefit from following you, working with you, just getting in your energy. So how can our listeners connect with you?
Couple places. I post half of my content just on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Cameron.Snow, Cameron with a K, Kameron. And then I do have a guide that I wrote on the story economy, the 7 stories that we briefly mentioned. And that'll get you on the email list where I talk about the other half. And that's bit.ly/story economy guide. And those are the places where I connect. We do have a Facebook group as well, that you can find through my Facebook or bit.ly/story economy group. But those are the places where I live and where I hang out. Can't do Instagram. Like, I have one, but I think in words and not pictures. So Facebook is the place, and email. Facebook and email is where I live.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much for being so vulnerable.
You got it.
You're giving people permission to step into their vulnerability and really step into their full potential. And that is amazing.
Awesome.
And of course, I've got to thank all of our listeners. We are doing this for you. If you have not already subscribed, please make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.